Hi everyone. I've recently come across a certain image of a certain dress and I realized it's all over the internet right now. Millions of people around the world seem to have a bit of a problem with identifying the color of that dress. What is it then? Black and blue, white on gold, or perhaps gold and blue? Why do so many people disagree on that? Sites claiming to have solved the problem provide some insight into the way our eyes and brains process visual information depending on the context in which a particular color is viewed. That, however, is only half the story here. Before we find out what's going on, I would like to show you a little video experiment, which you can also do at home. All you need is a blue object, a black object, some daylight, preferably from a window, and a tungsten light bulb, and obviously your smartphone, or in fact any other camera. Here is a printed image, which is blue, and a headphone case, which is black. This is more or less what it looks like in real life. But watch this. Now this is simply what happens when you play with exposure and white balance settings in your camera. The problem is that most smartphones and point-and-shoots play around with that setting for you automatically. And in some cases, they do a really poor job. Okay, so what is this exposure and white balance thing? To put it simply, correct exposure means that if you photograph a dark object, it stays dark in the image. And if you photograph something white, it stays white in the image as well. Smartphones usually try to figure out what it is that you're photographing, say a landscape, a portrait, or your veggie burger on a plate. And then they try to guess the correct exposure for that scene. But if they have problems figuring it out, they will assume a default one. The default scene is, on average, grey. You could call that mid-grey, or if you want to be really picky, that's about 12 to 18% grey, depending on the adopted standard. Normally, smartphones tend to measure the light throughout the entire frame, which works well most of the time. But if you tap the screen to focus on a particular area, they also tend to set the correct exposure only for what is within the little square. And if that area within the square happens to be mostly a black piece of material, then the camera will try to make it grey, rendering everything else much lighter than it is in reality. But how do we turn black into gold? This is where white balance kicks in. In short, this is what makes your photo look warm or cool. Now the tricky part is that light itself may show a slight tint, so it may be warm, yellowish, or cool, bluish. We would normally treat sunlight as default, or the point of reference. Hence, we say that tungsten or halogen light bulbs emit light which can be described as warm white, or in fact yellowish, when compared to sunlight. On the other hand, this makes most laptops and smartphone screens emit light which can be described as bluish or cool white. Now this creates a lot of problems, and when you add up the fact that our brains constantly play tricks on us, and by that I mean that your vision can adapt to the kind of lighting we're in, things get really messed up in terms of color. So at night, when you do not see sunlight, tungsten light bulbs actually appear to be white, until you turn on your laptop screen, that is, which at first seems blue, but when you look at it for a while, it seems okay. But then again, the light from the bulb seems yellow. But now let's get back to our experiment. When you take a photo in mixed light, say daylight and tungsten, it confuses your camera. When it sets the white balance to match daylight, everything that is lit by the artificial tungsten light will appear yellowish, and whatever is lit by daylight will appear neutral, so without the yellowish tint. Now, don't be misled by the term white balance. In fact, this applies to darker regions of the image just as well. So, if the camera sets the white balance wrong, it can actually turn black into dark brown. Now, let's say that the camera simultaneously sets the exposure incorrectly by assuming that this black case should be grey. And yes, you guessed it, when you make grey slightly yellowish, you get gold. And when you lighten up blue color and add a bit of yellow, you get white. So there you have it, your white and gold dress. Thanks for watching, and if you like the video, let me know in the comments.